Hey, everybody. Thanks a ton for joining us today into something that I'm extremely passionate about. My name's Alex McDougall. I'm the co-founder and chief investment officer of something called Bicameral Ventures out of Toronto. The discussion we're having today is a super interesting one and something that is highly topical and relevant to, honestly, everybody who interacts in the digital world today. We're calling it Going Back to Go Forward, Scaling Human Integrity in a Machine Speed World. And I want to make this a hopeful discussion. It's a pretty challenging time right now. We've never been more disconnected. We've never been more stressed out. We've never had sort of lower mental well-being. And we've never really been in sort of a more polarized world than we are right now. But beneath all these headlines and this deep, deep inequality that's sort of spreading around the globe, there's the building blocks and the ingredients of a really, really, really hopeful, human-centric future that's being built. So there's an amazing Edward O. Wilson quote that says, "The big problem with humanity today is we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And the exponential technology of today is incapable of creating this astounding, incredible, godlike outcomes. So AI, IoT, blockchain, the AR and VR world that we're living in. But it works in such a constrained operating system and a constrained framework that really has its roots back in the medieval times, the 1300s. And it's being executed on creatures like us that essentially are still operating in savanna mode half of the time. And so as the technology gets better and better and better, but the frameworks and the ways that we use it and deploy it get more and more outdated, these cracks get deeper and deeper, and we really end up in these fundamental imbalances that we have as a world in a situation today. And that's really where we want to talk about today and where we want to dive in on this discussion. So I want to talk about the fundamental imbalances today of the technological haves, or the entities that are using this next latest generation technology, and then the technological have-nots. And it's not even, we have cell phones or Wi-Fi or the usual sense of the technological have-nots. It's more how we're actually using it when we interact with a digital experience, who's setting it and who's actually experiencing it. And those are very, very different things, and we'll get into that. And then the second part is really, how do we solve those imbalances? How do we take the individual users and not restrict the technological players with regulation or sort of try and move backwards, but how do we upgrade the individual users so that we're all sitting on the same playing field? And finally, once we're all on that machine speed playing field, how do we recreate our institutions? How do we take it out of the medieval roots and acknowledge that, hey, we have this incredible technology and these incredible views and these incredible things that we can do today? How do we create new institutions that get us to better outcomes than the world we're sitting in today? But let's take it back for a second to today. Right now, obviously, we're living in a little bit of a digital illusion. When we interact with digital experiences, we're generally seeing the top 10% of it. And it looks amazing. It's incredibly responsive. It's incredibly adaptive. It lets us do everything that we want without thinking too hard. It shows us what we want, allows us to connect with people. But we don't have this, other 90% of what's the actual infrastructure that's powering and building that. I mean, everything that we do on the internet is free. That doesn't make sense from a business model perspective. And the underlying 90% that we look at is really, it's an industrial scale data extraction and predictive behavior analytics engine. And it really, we've essentially built our entire digital model on these tools and infrastructure that allows us to influence and manipulate behavior. And that's really, really scary because humans are, unfortunately, very manipulatable. Our biology tells us that collaboration is best. It's built right into why we've evolved the way we have. We have this bias to truth, as Malcolm Gladwell calls it, where if we get burned one time, but we collaborate successfully 99 times, our species is way farther ahead than if we have this natural inclination towards skepticism and distrust. So we generally take things at face value. And then when we're in a stressed out situation, our normally infinite range of outcomes where we can think about things in long terms and be compassionate and be these social wizards that got us to where we are today, when we're stressed out, our range of outcomes and range of responses narrows down to sort of the amygdala hijack lizard brain mode of anger, territorialism, aggression, myopia, short-term pleasure seeking. all of those behaviors are ripe for exploitation and ripe for extraction. And so when we think about ourselves in sort of a physical world, in order to manipulate somebody, you need to talk and meet face to face. You need to have those conversations. You need to judge somebody and try and move them towards your viewpoint. And that's the way we had it for thousands of years. I mean, trying to get people to do what you want or buy your product isn't new. But we've always had these physical limitations of needing to build things, having a static billboard, having to have face-to-face conversations. Now, when we've moved it into the digital world, one side of that discussion has the complete control to generate and regenerate the virtual environment that you're in real time, to tailor the content, to tailor the messaging, to tailor even the people who are in that space, or the bots that are in that space, or the machines that are in that space, all towards getting you to interact with that space in the way that whoever is creating that space wants you to. And it's not based on, okay, I think I know what this person is about when you're trying to do it in a physical world. In a digital world, how that space is created around you is based on this 90% well of predictive analytics and predictive behavior that's been generated about you in the world that you've experienced so far. So we essentially have this recipe for unlimited information asymmetry and unlimited behavioral manipulation. And it's not done for nefarious purposes most of the time. It's a byproduct of how we programmed our corporations. And I use programmed very intentionally there. We have this corollary that effectively, the prime directive is more money equals more good. Shareholder value maximization, Friedman economics. And so you have a gentleman driving down a highway who sees an insurance ad or home insurance ad, and if they just randomly see it, they have maybe a 0.01% chance of buying that home insurance. But if you have somebody who just bought a house and their Google Home overhears them say, hey, I just bought this house, I'm having a real trouble finding home insurance, and then they see a mobile ad for home insurance on their cell phone 30 seconds later, that person has a 5% chance of buying that policy. And the discrepancy between those outcomes is worth trillions of dollars on a global scale. And so those dollars are essentially finding the vehicles that can make people go from that 0.1% buying to that 5% buying. And essentially that's been the powering engine for how we've built our digital infrastructure so far. More behavior is calculable. More calculable behavior is more predictable. More predictable behavior equals more revenue. More predictable behavior can be caused by more manipulation. Therefore, more manipulation equals more revenue, loop, 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 loop. And because we've started to build our corporations more like machines, because we've tried to automate, because we've tried to cut out a cost, because we've tried to really remove as many humans and overhead as possible from our corporations, essentially everything that doesn't follow that more money equals more good corollary has been slowly optimized out. Compassion, long-term thinking, well-being, sense of community, all of those things don't sort of fit into the prime way that we're building our corporations, in my view. And so we have this commercial view of it, and I think where it gets even darker on this sort of industrial scale manipulation infrastructure is what we've seen and why this is such a pervasive story with something like Cambridge Analytica, where it's the same mechanisms of somebody creating and controlling a virtual space that we're not processing as individuals. But instead of to get us to buy insurance, it's to get us to vote in a different way. And that is really, really scary when you start thinking about anywhere along this spectrum, our human integrity is being reduced and being subjugated to algorithms that are essentially operating on somebody else's behalf, generally for a profit motive. So, what do we do about it? How do we change this? How do we protect ourselves from digital manipulation? Starting today, what can we do to change this? How do we hijack this infrastructure and essentially change the manipulation outcomes? I would love to just sort of mindless go my way through Facebook and Google and end up jacked and with a great relationship with my family. Why can't we be manipulated to those type of better outcomes? How do we miniaturize this technology and give it to the actual people who are experiencing this technological world? Why can't, when I walk into a virtual space, a little AI that's working for me say, that's not real, that's bullshit, that person's a bot, this is what you need to see, and more importantly, just turn off your phone and go outside and go for a run for a little while. And finally, once we've created this world where we're all in the same playing field, and this is really the biggest point of this conversation, if more money equals more good, if that corollary is broken, then what is good? How do we calculate it? And how do we optimize a system around it? And that's what we're going to solve today. It's all coming to a head as we go forward on this. So let's dive into it. I've got a panel with me today of incredible experts globally. So I want to really start with a bit of a dive into to one of the quotes that I mentioned there. The real danger is that humanity has Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. We're going to go around, and if everybody can give an intro to themselves, a little bit of background, and from your perspective, how do you sort of view that quote, and how do you sort of view where we're sitting today? Maybe let's start with Aparna.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you all, and thank you for inviting me to this session. This topic is near and dear to me, both from a professional standpoint and what I'm doing today as well. So my background, I am a software engineer by trade, but have had a successful career working for some of the top internet companies like Yahoo and eBay, pretty much seen the rise of this data evolution that has happened for the last 20 years, and literally was in the front seat of creating these so-called experiences or virtual bubbles, as we deem to interpret them as today. I'm the founder and CEO of Zemply now. Zemply is an aging in place platform that uses artificial intelligence to enable the elderly people to live in their own homes, and potentially, if they can and if they want to, choose to end their lives in their own homes. So it's a very profound project for me, and something that I came into purely based on the experiences of my past corporate life, which was essentially using data. And literally it was, I'd worked for some of the best companies. I was done selling ads. I was done selling products. I really wanted to use everything that I had learned to create a big difference in the life of people. And which is where the inspiration of creating Zemply came from. To your question of, Paleolithic minds, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, the way I interpret it is, it kind of goes back to Darwinism and the theory of natural selection. I feel like, there's a huge difference between animals and human beings. If you look at the theory of evolution, animals, and to some extent human beings up to a point, were adapting to the environment, but humans at some point of time decided to adapt the environment to them. So, and we somehow rationalized and justified it as our point or reason for success, right? There's a reason why human race has evolved to the level that it is today. So as long as we are rationalizing and justifying it that way, I feel like we will continue to want and create these godlike technologies, because that's the only way we can justify our existence. So, whether it started from fire or the wheel or the industrial revolutions or test tube babies and now artificial intelligence, there's always this sort of superficial justification we're making for why that is right for us. And I think the time is right now to question some of this and see and really explore, whether this is the way we want to evolve humanity overall.
Super interesting. Thanks a lot, Aparna, and awesome to have you on the panel. Let's go to Michael next.
Hi guys, I'm Michael, so I'm half Singaporean, half British. My background is also as a software developer and engineer. I've been building technology companies for the past 12 years. I got started in the crypto space, building the Android app for WikiLeaks and helping fundraise using Bitcoin in 2010 when the government froze the bank accounts of WikiLeaks. I started one of the top social networks in the UK, which had a very similar comparison to what Alex mentioned, with handling lots of private data. And what we were doing, we were very similar to Tinder. We were matching people who liked one another, and we were using we had parameters to drive forward some of our goals, which was super interesting. Also ran a video conferencing app used by a few million users, which I sold. I totally agree with what Alex was saying and what Aparna was saying earlier with regards to how we can involve society. I think part of the way which we can do that is using a a more cooperative setup in society where we move the ownership of organizations from simply being founder and investor owned to one where the users and the customers are stakeholders. So if you look at any organization or any company, it's all held by a small group of people, whether it's investors or founders like us or myself. And that's what causes huge inequity. And I think if we don't solve the economic piece in it, then we're just going to find it very tricky to solve environmental, social issues, health, many different problems. I also worked at the third biggest venture fund in Europe, Wellington Partners, where we would invest in maybe 8 or 10 deals a year and have 3,000 pitches coming in. So I think solving the difficulty to fundraise for projects is something which should be addressed. And I'm really excited for where blockchain and tokens come in. And I think the blockchain and token space is at a stage now where it's still extremely early. If you look at the internet timeline, it's probably 1995 or 1994, where we haven't even reached the dot-com bubble in the year 2000, where a lot of projects disappear, and then you get real projects with solid economic models appearing. So I'm excited because I think many of us here are spending a lot of time in the blockchain and token space, and I do think that this is going to have a more profound impact on the world than the internet or the mobile phone. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so economics leads, but different economic structures, and essentially leveraging the technology to spread economics around in a better way than we have today. We're definitely going to come back to that point in a little bit. Let's go to Gary. I want somebody who's got a ton of experience in sort of the current tech world and is at the bleeding edge of where we're at today.
Yeah, no, so my name's Gary Fowler. Thanks, Alex. It's great to be here. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've done 15 companies, have had a $1 billion exit, and also involved in a near unicorn, Yva.ai. So I love technology guy. I've been doing it for 36 years. Lived in Russia, by the way, for 14 years. I love going to interesting experiences on the edge. I started the first accelerator in Russia. They said an American couldn't do it. I did it. The #1 accelerator. I also started the #1 corporate private accelerator. Again, people said you couldn't do it. I'm passionate about impact. I'm actually building a $100 million fund in Atlanta with the former mayor of Atlanta, Kasim Reed. And the idea is to be able to bring, I'm into diversity and democratization of opportunities. So we're working with the Black community to bring more Black executives into AI companies. And so bringing companies from all over the world to places like Atlanta and Chicago to be able to make the world a little bit better place. So anyhow, I'm also a clinical psychologist. So what you're saying, Alex, on the clinical psychology side rings to me. I remember studying the McLean's reptilian limbic and neocortex. So it's right to the heart. But look at where we are today. You know, it's really the search for meaning. Here we are on Zoom. In 1918, during the Spanish flu, we didn't have a chance to do that. In terms of technology driving us forward, think of all the changes that are taking place. The population of the planet Earth in the last 100 years has quadrupled. There's 7.9 billion people today. Look at it in terms of sustainability. We've got to reach for the stars. There's 6 billion planets like Earth just in our galaxy. And they're estimated there could be 100 billion galaxies. So we need to look out. Technologies, actually, from my standpoint, technologies has been a good help because here we are. We've got two worlds today. We've got the physical world and we got the virtual world. People need to feel connected together. Now we've also democratized opportunities because it doesn't matter if you're in New York City, like Delhi, or you're in the Netherlands, or you're in Monterrey, Mexico. It doesn't matter. We're here together. So I believe what's happened is technologies really, from a neocortex standpoint, has brought us together. And I believe technology can democratize the opportunity. And I remember reading Nikola Tesla, his book, in the 1900s, and it talked about, evenly distributed electricity around the world. Well, guess what? That's what's happening today. That infrastructure, we're being pulled forward by it. And from my standpoint, I love it. Artificial intelligence is where I am. I've written 64 articles on AI and entrepreneurship just in the last year. I believe having those type of smart assistants that do the right thing, that, as Alex said, have compassion, emotion AI. That's where we start to really help ourselves. We go past the reptilian brain. We go past the limbic node. We move into the neocortex, and we make life a bit better for all of us. We need to share. We need to have compassion. And I believe these trying times that we're going through right now with the pandemic have actually done something incredible. Look at just Zoom. In the last 6 months, the number of subscribers to Zoom have gone from 30 million to 300 million daily participants and active users. Imagine that kind of impact of leveling the opportunity. I love it.
Awesome. And I think, making all of the social behavioral psychology stuff calculable and optimizable and influenceable on the same level that we've used to have done with business processes is the merger of these technologies, and definitely we'll circle back to that. And if we can't do it, Gary, we can just leave this whole world behind. The 6 billion new planets out there. No, and obviously not the intention of this. But let's go specifically to one of my very good friends and a part of our portfolio bicameral, a Black executive of an AI company, Dele Atanda.
Thanks, Alex. Great to be here. Great to be in this esteemed crowd. What a great conversation. So background-wise, so I suppose I started my digital career in the corporate space. In fact, actually, I always like to recount that my first job in digital was at the Central Office for Information, which incidentally is where George Orwell worked, and apparently where he got the idea for the Ministry of Truth in 1984. So I never understood the significance of that while I was there, but it's certainly resonant now. And, from the COI, I went into various sorts of corporate roles and headed up digital for larger multinationals. I headed up digital for Diageo globally for a while, basically peddling alcohol. Then I was headhunted into British American Tobacco, basically peddling tobacco through digital means. So I really got quite deep into the manipulation economy and the use of data to coerce people and drive about behavioral change and looking at addiction and all of these factors, really understanding them at a digital scale. And in that space, I became really fascinated with data and the potential of data to be transformative. Long story short, the more I looked at it, the more I realized that there were big sort of social, civil rights, human rights issues associated around this. So I set up an NGO called the Internet Foundation back in 2013 to really look at establishing digital human rights as an extension, effectively taking the principles of human rights and extending them into cyberspace. From there, and really, one thing I came to understand was that you needed to, we basically set up the foundation in response to Snowden Gate, where this sort of whole, expose was really built out about the surveillance industrial complex and how it was growing and maturing. And we understood initially that then we needed to approach things from a universal basis, because on one hand, you had the NSA saying that they weren't spying on US citizens, but they were spying on the rest of the world. You had GCHQ saying we're not spying on British citizens, we're spying on the rest of the world. And hello, they're just sharing information among each other. So it was kind of a nonsense. And actually, when I think about it, coming back to Gary's point, that was a really critical turning point, because that was actually a species level event. It was one of these, it was the first kind of, COVID is one of these species level events that we've encountered, that we've come across. And it was one of the first times that we really had to look at the world in a universal context. Similarly, I suppose, to how we came up with human rights post Second World War in that context. So essentially, that it's a real sweet spot of interest for me. This confluence of technology and culture and evolution. I've written on it. I build technology, so I run a company called MetaMe, which basically builds self-sovereign data and AI systems, and that's sort of our vision about giving people complete sovereignty and ownership of their data, and then giving them sovereign AI. I think is really kind of the machine that we need to equip people with to be able to make sense of this world. And I write fiction on it as well. So I also have a company called Meta Knights Media, and we've started a comic series that really kind of explores this concept of a physical digital world and diversity and inclusion in technology and quantum digital realities that we're sort of moving fast into. So that, I think that's probably enough in terms of background.
Awesome.
I'd love to, on the Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technologies, you know, the only one I really have a problem with in that is the medieval institutions. I think that's where the problem really lies. You know, the Paleolithic emotions, I would actually argue, in many ways, represent godlike emotions. You know, and if this balance between the emotions and technologies is really the evolutionary crux. The problem is these medieval institutions that are keeping us anchored and creating these frameworks that bring us to the lowest part of the reptilian complex. You know, I think it's really important, you know, when it's fascinating that the human brain, the cerebral cortex, resulted from an evolution in the olfactory sense of the reptilian brain. And, you know, the reptilian existence is the serpent effectively is the key to the home of the reptilian, which is such a fascinating creature. It's almost like a wave pattern in and of itself. It's a particle and a wave at once. It's the ultimate representation of that relativity, you know, Einstein's relativity, the particle and the wave conundrum of light. And I think, you know, when you look into ancient, you know, going to the theme of the subject, going back to go forward, when you look at ancient civilizations, the reptile was, the serpent particularly, was a symbol of wisdom. And I always like to think, you know, it again sort of encapsulates this 0-1 principle, right? You know, on one hand, you can look at a serpent and you can have this principle of one. On the other, there's the famous allogram of the serpent eating, you know, its tail, which represents the 0, the circle. So it's really, and, you know, when you look at ancient Egypt, for example, the Wachet and Nekhabet serpents that were worn on the heads of the pharaohs not only symbolized wisdom, but they also symbolized this intertwined DNA factor. So, you know, I think that there is what we are on the cusp of is a evolutionary leap. You know, when I've written in the past that effectively this digital revolution is potentially as important as the cognitive revolution, where we became human from animals in that regard. And I think that's what we're kind of on the cusp of breaking into, this quantum leap, this evolutionary leap that in many ways, I believe the information revolution and the digital revolution are really ushering us towards. But it's the medieval institutions that are really based on this lowest principle of reptilian greed and self-survival and selfishness that are the problem.
Super interesting. And we'll definitely come back to, all of those points. I mean, obviously the personalized self-sovereign AI is a big sort of piece of what we want to talk about. Really interesting point on, I've always sort of pictured that quote as Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, godlike technology, but it's more of a U shape if I'm understanding you correctly, that it's okay to have Paleolithic emotions and godlike technology. It's the break in the middle that is really causing all of these challenges. And that's an interesting point that we can dig into. And I love the idea of, using the infrastructure and the technology of today to, we do sort of manipulate to the lowest common denominator right now to serve the goals that we've sort of created. Let's manipulate to the highest common denominator, and let's, then it's not even manipulation anymore. It's help and aid and positive use of technology, right? Awesome. Can't wait to dive into that stuff. Let's move to Stefan. You are on mute, my friend.
I was on mute. Now I'm not anymore. Yeah, no, thanks for having me here. It's great to be with all of you guys on the panel. Some of I've heard of, never met. And yeah, my background, look, I started off, and I've been very fortunate to go through a number of big transformational shifts. I started my first entrepreneur career in China. I launched 4 mobile networks from ground zero, competing against the national carrier, working with China, and which we then sold to China Unicom in 1999. So people were, we don't need mobile phones. What do we need mobile phones? We all have phones. We can call people. We have schedules. We go and sit at a desk and talk to people. And then all of a sudden, I came across Sun Microsystems. They had this little piece of software called Java. And how could we transport that piece of software onto mobile phones and then build out applications and grow a whole ecosystem? So my focus there was to, with a small team, we built out this huge ecosystem on the ability to create and deliver applications to mobile phones. It was only in 2007 when the iPhone came out that all of a sudden that really hit a new sort of proportion and level, which Sun at the time wasn't ready to go down that path. So a number of us just decided to go our own paths. And I think most of us on here have all got some sort of developer background. And I was a real big believer in developer-driven innovation, right? So how do we expose services, APIs, protocols to developers to come up and use their creativity on how to twist, turn, tweak, evolve, greenfield, create whole new services around that, and ultimately ended up building my next business, which was to create a developer agency which managed ecosystems of developers for the big tech companies from Juniper Networks, Qualcomm, and Sony, and you name it. We grew it to about 60,000 software developers inside about 12,000 companies around the world, doing 30 hackathons a year. And it was super fun, but it was a roller coaster. Yeah, and in 2012, I got introduced to Bitcoin, and a developer in Guatemala wanted to be paid in Bitcoin. And I just immediately paid I bought some on eBay. And it was a pretty good price. I used PayPal to pay for my, Bitcoin. And yeah, and then I got hooked because we were on a Skype call like now, using video at the same time. And amazing where Skype didn't go and where Zoom went. But I paid him immediately. He got it right away. So it was instant, with no fees. And just 2 days later, I had to go to a traditional bank and I had to cash a check, and it cost me $300 US, and it'd take a week to clear. And from then I was hooked, and yeah, then built out conferences, got involved, and paid my staff in Bitcoin, paid team members in Bitcoin, and just was really into crypto. I just got off the role as CEO of Bitcoin.com, where I then took on that role and worked closely with Roger Ver and scaled the business from 2 million wallets to 15 million wallets. We launched an exchange, got a credit card going. And now I'm really heavily involved with Seeds, involved in a number of ESG initiatives where I believe we have to get the consumer connected to ESG initiatives. We have to let the masses help drive that. And with technology that we have today, we can do that. We have built out all of these regulations, these overlaying sort of governing institutions that are there to sort of control how we engage and tell us what we have to do. But we have technology today that allows everybody to participate, communicate, and how do we use those, drive an emotional attachment to the users, and to change things up. The human is extremely creative especially when it comes down to survivability. Look how quick we come back from disasters. We can turn this stuff around really well if we're allowed to let go and are allowed to be free and think creatively, not by boundaries that are lines on a piece of paper that stipulate this is what country we're a part of, because the environment doesn't care. Viruses go across borders and it doesn't care about the jurisdiction across each of the borders. So how do we change that, and how do we build communities around these initiatives and impact and have an impact? That's pretty much yeah, that's pretty much it, and why I'm excited about the opportunity. Tokenization, mobile, and really the blockchain for governance, right? Mobile, everybody has a mobile. 60% of the world's population have a smartphone, not a phone, a smartphone. And then we can tokenize everything. It's just a matter of how we treat those tokens and how we spread those tokens and allow people to engage and use those tokens as well.
Awesome. And super excited to have you, Stefan, because for many reasons, and obviously we've spent some time together in Hong Kong during some of these challenging moments of species level events of as Deli spoke about. But I think you were one of the drivers of the initial revolution of sort of equalizing technology with commercializing smartphones and adding that compute power to people's pockets. And that was our first opportunity to really get everybody on the same playing field. Hasn't quite worked out exactly as we thought it may at that point, but we all get another kick at the can, and I love the hopeful message that everybody's going for here. Let's wrap it up with the intro session with Reiki. You're doing some incredible stuff with seeds, and really interesting to see you guys working with Stefan now as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm Reiki. My background is more in the natural world. I love plants. I love forests. I love especially healthy, thriving forests and how that mycelial network communicates across the forest. I mean, fungi is fascinating. It's an interkingdom translator. It actually helps animals and plants communicate with each other so humans can communicate. Anyway, so that's my background, is living systems and community. So how do groups of people come together to common and steward a common pool resource? So where I really got into this, taking a step back, I believe humanity is living through a modern day renaissance. We're completely, as Atanda was saying, we're having like an evolutionary leap in what humanity actually looks like. And a big part of that is how we redesign what civilization looks like. I mean, you're talking about medieval institutions, and that's, I mean, they don't make any sense anymore. So we're sitting here today in a global world. The people who designed our system several hundred years ago, they couldn't fathom a global world. They didn't even know what a global world was. Some of them didn't even know it was a globe. So like the level of—
Some still don't.
Yes, some still don't. Exactly, yeah. So I believe we're living through a modern day renaissance, and it's maybe not interesting that the Black Plague preceded the Enlightenment. But there's a beautiful quote by Buckminster Fuller, and it's that, humanity is acquiring all the right technology for all the wrong reasons. And when I look at the patterns of what humanity is going through, I like to look at natural patterns and patterns that we see in the natural world. And one of those is a birth. So when something is in a womb, it's got all these disconnected and disjointed cells, kind of like blobbing together, forming and creating different organs, all of which don't make any sense within a womb. You don't need legs within a womb, there's nowhere to walk. You don't need lungs, there's no air to breathe. You don't need a stomach, there's no food to digest. So you've got all of these things that you don't actually need in the context of where they're evolving and where they're being created. It's not until that baby leaves the womb that all of a sudden all of those tools make sense, and it's a paradigm shift, and it happens instantly. And it's the same thing with the switch from like a caterpillar to a butterfly. Another Buckminster quote, there's nothing within a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly. And I think it's the same thing that civilization's dealing with today. All of our institutions and all the tools we're building, they don't make a lot of freaking sense. And in a lot of cases, they kind of look like a cancer. And that's the same thing with a baby in a womb. Within a different paradigm and a different way of looking at it, you might look at that baby as a cancer. Oh man, it's sucking all the resources from the mother. It's growing exponentially. Like, oh my gosh, if we don't like kill that baby quickly, it's gonna kill the mom. We don't think that because we know what happens after that baby reaches its maturity. And what's also not interesting is if you look at the growth trajectory, like the velocity of growth and the total growth of population of our global population, and you pair that over a baby within a womb, they're like exactly identical. It's It's crazy. So what it's saying is that about 2050, we're going to taper off at around 10 or 11 billion people. And that's when velocity hits zero. And within a baby, that's when the birth actually happens. So anyway, I think humanity is going through this birthing process now, and we're reimagining what our nervous system looks like, which could be the blockchain. And we talk about tokenizing everything. Well, using fiat as our only means of value exchange is completely absurd. Anytime you have an ecosystem and there's one thing to do it, there's a monoculture, it breaks down. Just like within the body, it's not just the red blood cell that communicates information across the body. There's a myriad of ways to communicate across the body. And within organs, there's a myriad of ways to communicate within an organ, like the brain communicates differently than the heart communicates. So when we think about tokenizing things, this is how I view it. We're like creating a different nervous system for a metahuman. So we're having different ways of distributing value, different ways of making decisions, and we're making it more resilient by creating a more diversity of ways to send this information streams. So this is the viewpoint that I try to look at it, is humanity is becoming a metahuman, and all of these tools that we're talking about is supporting that transition. So everything I care about is like, one, regeneration, because if we don't take care of our ecosystems, we're fucked. Everything we're talking about doesn't matter because civilization is not going to continue if we destroy our ecosystems. So anything that civilization is going to do going forward, we have to be fundamentally concerned about how we're taking care of our natural living world. So what I'm focused on is called the Regenerative Renaissance, which is that transition from where the fuck we are today to civilization 2.0, where we know we can get to if we rethink and radically rethink the systems that we're living in. I think blockchain gives us a bridge because it starts off with what we're already used to, these tools for exchanging just like dollars, but they give us this digital interface to build new types of economies. So once you step into a digital economy, now evolutionary upgrades are just a simple code change. Like right now, our current institutions don't allow for that evolutionary upgrade. So that's what really fascinates me. That's the only reason I came back into the digital space and out of the forest, because, you know, completely transparent. It's kind of like the mushrooms told me that this is what I had to do. So, you know, I'm kind of listening to them. And I'm trying to remap, you know, how mushrooms interact with an ecosystem. And I believe they, you know, they have an incredible level of intelligence, and I believe they want these systems to emerge. And it's very inspiring that that same message is being delivered to so many people across the globe, and we're finding each other. So I'm really excited about this transition, and I'll close it off at that.
Awesome. Thanks, Reiki. That's super interesting. I love the womb analogy, because that is, and I'd sort of talked in that vein a little bit off the top of, we have all this headline stuff that looks bad, but under the surface, there's all of these features and pieces that are being built that kind of, you know, are leading towards what I think is a really interesting and good point, that they're kind of useless, or they're even detrimental, or being used in the wrong way today. But, you know, have faith in the natural process. And I think that's the point of, we need to be able to create and turn it into a natural process, instead of, you know, the monoculture, or having cascade effects just essentially take down our artificial process in sort of the way that we've built the unresilient systems that we've organized today. Awesome. That is a long but incredibly detailed and good round of introductions. And I hope everybody who's watching this is as excited as I am about having this crew of incredibly diverse global experts to dive deeper into this discussion. And so let's start a little bit about, you know, back to today's world. You know, we have this system where we all have technology, we all have phones in our pockets, we're all interacting with a Zoom call right now. We're all searching for things. Is there a way, you know, and historically we've been able to say, okay, well, you know, I don't like that city, I'm moving over here. I don't like that relationship, I'm ending it and I'm going over here. Can we opt out of today's system? Can we say, hey, okay, I'm no longer sharing my data, I'm no longer buying into this? How do we do that? And can we actually get away from it, or can we get around it? And I want to start with Aparna on that concept of how can we turn off this system, or can we?
I think I would like to say that the train has left the station. So it would be very hard for us to opt out of what we're perceiving today as the new norm. And for a variety of reasons, I think there is tremendous benefits that we're getting to, right? To everybody's point here, tremendous benefits that we're getting out of this. the question really is about, it comes down to, are we using this responsibly? Sorry. It kind of goes back to the points that were made about, addictive usage of anything, right? Whether it's cigarettes or alcohol. And, I feel like we've reached a point where technology is becoming like that, right? Take, for example, Netflix. I think Netflix masks binge watching as entertainment, but really, when you're looking at, you come out of your work every day and you're stressed out, you want to just, forget about your work day, you sit in front of Netflix. It's no longer, hey, I'm going to switch it off after 30 minutes of watching. It goes on. And fundamentally, Netflix is trying to justify the entertainment value or escape value that it's attributing to its business, by making it addictive. And I don't know, I think at some point of time, where do you draw the line, right? That becomes the question. Is it left to the general humans and the population to now exercise self-control? Then it kind of goes back to the reptilian brain. How capable are we of doing that? As with this population and the stressful environments that we live in, we're always seeking escape. So to the extent that these technologies are promoting that, the chances are, you're going to become a victim of that regardless. And then how do we sort of pull ourselves out of this and really go back to thinking, how do we become these meta humans or uber humans who are judiciously looking at technology for what it can bring to us rather than succumbing to what it's trying to do to us, how it's trying to manipulate us. So, to your point, I think the issue is not to go back. The idea is not to go back. The idea is to not reverse the trend, but how to move forward, knowing responsibly how we can take this forward in a meaningful way. That's all about compassion and improving humanity as a whole from all dimensions, not just, dollars.
Very, very interesting. And I love the idea of not going back, but going forward. And obviously it's a juxtaposition of the title of this panel as well. Delio, I want to go to you because one of my biggest things that I think about all the time is, okay, we've got a ton of privacy laws and we've got a ton of regulation that's essentially trying to curb, the worst of these data extraction policies. And even recently, Apple came out with an upgrade to their iOS platform that Facebook threw a huge fit about because it would cripple their business model. And so in many ways, we're creating these barriers that force us to go back. And in many ways, those are, it's not a bad place to be, to go backwards a little bit from sort of the farthest reaching pieces of our technology today. But how do we as individuals process that? How do we create good privacy laws that don't move our paradigm backwards, but just allow us to reset and kind of create a more sustainable future going forward? And I know I'm asking you this because I know you're heavily involved in drafting some of these privacy laws.
Yeah. Okay. As individuals, how do we do it? Let me come at that from where Aparna left off. I think that is it possible to opt out of the digital paradigm, the digital world? And that might be one effective way that we could all do boycott Facebook, for example. But essentially, I think the challenge with that, it's like opting out of the economy. It's like opting out of the financial economy. Yeah, you can go and set up a farm in Nebraska. You have to buy the farm in the first place. You have to get property rights around it. So it's very difficult to function in the world without being part of the economic system, without buying in or participating in the economic system. And to be honest with you, you find actually the most affluent people are the only ones who can effectively escape the mechanics of the economic system, right? Buy islands and kind of isolate themselves and live this idyllic life effectively. So, and I think the digital system, in the sense that data has become currency, is just the next evolution of that. But I think ultimately then what it really comes down to then, similarly to the economic paradigm, is it's the relationship between the corporation and the market. That's what really is the infrastructure that's driving this whole dynamic. and the incentives around that. So when we look at policy around how can we create a more egalitarian, a more equitable framework, well, you know, it's a big social question, it's a big governance question, it's a big policy question that goes, you know, it's centered in tech at the moment, but the context of this question is really around the fundamentals of society. It's as fundamental as, you know, socialism versus capitalism in that regards, the free market economy. These are what we're really asking when we're asking these questions around what frameworks do we have in place. So privacy becomes an issue of antitrust. And, you know, look at Epic Games versus Apple, the poster boy of privacy in the tech space, right? And, you know, but it wanted 30% of flesh, if you excuse the mix of puns, you know, for everything going forward. And this, you know, that they become inseparable. So it's as much a question about how do we create an equitable economic framework. It's the same question we're having in this social justice pandemic that we're in the midst of at the moment. You know, forget the violence and the consistent murdering of people of color. Ultimately, what this is protecting is an economic paradigm. That's really what is at the heart of this, right? So I think in terms of as people, you know, it goes back to the whole, all the usual sort of, we need, I think it's a kind, what we need is a kind of consciousness, because in this consciousness, we can ask the right questions and make the right mandates. It comes down to asking more of our leaders, of our governors, if you will, those who govern us, to create a system that serves us, because the system doesn't serve us at the moment. It serves corporations and those who own the corporations. And I think that's what it ultimately comes down to.
Super interesting. And you know, I love drawing the very tangible analogy of you know, House Party, the app, was something that blew up during the pandemic. And everybody just downloaded it, didn't look at the terms and conditions, blah, 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 used it, had fun. All of their data, you know, got it, based on the business model, you know, it's stated there. Ended up being used as GPS data that powered a lot of kind of the social distancing trackers that sprung up in other parts of the internet, which was a really interesting use of that data. But you know, you could use House Party privately. You could say, hey, I'm going to turn off all my data feeds. I'm going to sneak in the side door of the house. I'm not going to share anything. I'm going to use a fake email address, blah, blah, blah. But if everybody did that, House Party would not exist. And that's sort of this fundamental barrier that we run into today of, if everybody takes the best personal way to optimize their own privacy and their own, you know, their own safety, I guess, for lack of a better word, our entire digital infrastructure of today does not exist. And until we can go a layer deeper via regulation, via, you know, social changes, via model changes, via institutional changes, we're always going to run somewhere into this profit versus privacy headway. And whether whoever's winning at that particular time, it's not really a sustainable win when we have two institutions that are so diametrically opposed to each other. Reiki, I want to go to, oh, sorry, yes, Aparna, please.
So this one point I do want to, an anecdote I want to share from my experience working at eBay. So my job at eBay was to really work on the massive behavior data that we were collecting. So eBay, as you all know, is a marketplace. So we had both buy side and sell side data. So we could actually match intent better than anyone in the world, right? If someone was searching for something, we would be able to quickly say, okay, you know, this is how we can convert them faster. And the whole paradigm was to bring them to buy more stuff, which in theory they didn't need. So that was how it was. But, you know, our job was to convert that need into a want and make them buy it. So it all sort of rooted into was rooted into this concept of consumerism, right? So as long as consumerism survived, there was room for companies like e-commerce companies and to grow. And you know, who was looking at data privacy, etc. I remember sitting in these meetings where we would at least in eBay, we were required to judiciously make a case for why we would want to use the data. So we would sit in these protracted discussions with the legal teams, etc., and we had to make a case for why we thought that using the data was important, and why justifying that revenue increase was important from a standpoint, and why we were not compromising some of the privacy rules that we had in our terms and conditions on the platform. While we were watching this, Facebook came along, and then, everything, it just was like data guardianship was out of the window. I mean, we were sitting there looking at this and saying, the world doesn't want us to protect their data. Why are we taking this up on ourselves, right? So we were in conflict with our own business models. We're saying, people are not hesitating to share their data. And we were looking at Facebook and we were looking at eBay saying, why the hell are we doing this? Doesn't make sense anymore. And I think somewhere in there, it just ballooned into what became a complete disrespect for someone's data, right? And it is what we're dealing with today. Did I sign up to get notifications on my phone every 30 seconds from things that I don't want? I just happened to talk about it to someone, and suddenly I'm seeing ads on the phone. I know I didn't sign up. It's becoming a nuisance factor, right? So somewhere in there, we have to sort of decide. And to the point of opt-out, yes, opt-out should be the de facto rule. We want to opt in only if we want to if we are interested in what we want to see from these technologies and marketplaces and communities or even social networks.
Awesome. I'm gonna open this to the group because I think everybody has a different opinion and everybody has a different driver for it, and everybody has a sort of a different view on this. And that's a fantastic point, Aparna, and something I almost every time I talk about this get at least one question about. The average person, A, doesn't know, B, does not give a fuck about privacy. Like it's not something that's priority number 1, 2, or 3 on their average day-to-day world. And some of that is, how we get sort of moved through the digital system. We're not really incentivized or encouraged to lift up under the hood and see what's going on. It's incredibly easy to just sort of breeze through all that stuff. How do we get individual people to care? And from a builder mindset, given we are all builders on this call, and this is a bit of a dystopian thing to say, but do we need individual people to care? Can we create a better system and then sort of still have people kind of mindlessly work their way through it and again, get to better outcomes, sort of that manipulation for a better outcome? So I don't know exactly who to target this, but would love anybody to take a stab at it.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, I want to say something. I mean, for each one of us on this call, I just want us to think for a second. The entire web in 1996 had 257,000 websites. Each person on this call has about 300,000 items within their own personal cloud today. How many email addresses do each one of you had? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8? How many data repositories? Slack, Dropbox, Box, Google Drive? Think about it. 20? We are inundated with information every day. The number of items within your own personal cloud doubles every year. In 5 years, you'll have 10 million items. How many of you have said, I know that file exists, but I can't find it? Why? You've either forgotten the keywords or you've forgotten the location. We're inundated. If we don't use technology to help us make decisions, and what you're saying, I have another viewpoint. If we don't have that technology that can be really smart assistants to help us, we're not going to be able to survive in this digital age. We are inundated with information. And look at it. So in 5 years, 10 million items. How in the world are we going to make decisions about our lives? We need to look differently.
So I'm totally agreeing with you. I think, Gary, we need to create the tools that allow us to have privacy as a byproduct and a correct data paradigm. Reiki, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. I think siloing information is not the right battle, and it's probably not even the right approach. I think it's actually getting rid of the extraction and exploitation of that data. And this happens at the economic and financial level. It's the economic incentives that give corporations the incentive to go in, extract our data, and then manipulate that and abuse it. And I believe we can opt out. Let's not opt out of getting our data taken. Let's opt out of the economic and financial paradigm that's abusing us and abusing our planet, you know? So, and I believe we can opt out of that level. It's already happening. It's already happening when people take their money and decide, I'm only gonna use crypto to exchange value. Because if we look at our civilization and think of it as like a tech stack, the very foundation of that is a financial system. Well, first it's agriculture, but we don't get, it's in a financial system and a governance system. Those two things make an economic system. Right? And if we opt out of the financial layer, we opt out of that entire tech stack. And then we can build a new civilizational tech stack. And we can rethink what we're doing with this data. And instead of it being exploiting and extracting value from people and abusing people, we can use this abundance of data to serve humanity. I think that's what Gary's talking about. We can use smart AI that's going to be able to take this abundance of data and use it to actually improve humanity's life. And we're not going to do that if we silo our data and we try to go backwards and think of like isolation again. And again, if we're using the baby analogy, cells and the baby wouldn't survive if all the cells are like, oh shit, that cell's trying to communicate with me and it knows what I'm doing. Like I gotta, you know, guard myself and like tell no one what I'm doing. Like that's not how that human operates effectively. It operates by being completely transparent, sharing its data and communicating freely. So I think we need to move in that direction, but we need to change the economic incentives that people are abusing this data. And if we make it fully transparent, then we get rid of the weaponization of that data. Because that's the idea, is if one person has data and they know what's going on there, but the rest of the people don't have it, then that data could be weaponized. But if it's fully transparent, you can't weaponize that data anymore. So that's the world I think we're moving into, is one that's more transparent, more abundant, and more connected rather than less.
And
awesome.
We use, you know, it's really funny from my standpoint, we use Google to search, we use Gmail, and we're concerned about our privacy. It's unbelievable, right? I mean, it's like crazy. And every one of us on the phone, on this call, are guilty of it.
And we know it's happening.
We all do it. You know, and then
because there's no alternatives.
Well, okay, I like to jump in on this for a second.
Please.
So look, I think it's like physics, right? There are rules, right? Convenience trumps privacy all day, right? Because we're all trying to get on with our lives. And if there's something that's going to give us more convenience, we're going to do that at the cost of our privacy. But that doesn't mean that we don't care about our privacy. It doesn't mean that privacy isn't important to us. You know, I think when privacy really is power, and, you know, it is all about control. And, you know, this idea that privacy is not important, that it's going to go away, that, you know, as Zuckerberg and Schmidt, for example, try to espouse, you know, considerably at the turn of the century, is proven to be, you know, completely harmful. Now, when I look at digital rights, I think, especially when it comes into the commercial space, it really comes down to three core pillars. You know, it's about privacy, agency, and property, right? And agency is perhaps the most important one in this, because that's really about freedom. It's about the freedom to make informed decision. Now, we can say that we don't care about privacy, but then we end up with a president like Trump, because it all is the same paradigm that's driving that. You know, the ability to be manipulated, the ability to be coerced in this way comes down to this, you know, gradual erosion of privacy to the extent that we become programmable. Forget persuadable, we're actually programmable in that sense. So I think that's, you have to first of all look at what is at stake. What is it that we're really talking about is at stake here? And I fundamentally believe that you don't have democracy without privacy, if you really kind of want to shortcut it all down to it. Now, and we can dive into that in detail, but I think the other false choice here is privacy versus profit. You know, I don't think that is true. And in fact, I believe that the opposite is effect. And we developed this principle that we call the economy of self. And the basic premise of it is that the solution, data is the future. Absolutely. Technology is the future. Absolutely. And we definitely do need personal AIs to deal with this, you know, tsunami of information that's coming towards us. That is the information revolution. That is the new information state that we're moving into in that regards. So it's not really about moving away from that, but the issue, so the first issue is that it's about the quality of the data, right? And the quality of the information. Now, one of the problems with the surveillance industrial complex and the manipulation economy is that it defaults towards this low level data, this low quality data. We call this the dirty data economy. It's like the petroleum economy in effect. You know, everyone says data is the oil of the 21st century. Well, you know, over a decade ago, we coined the term clean data economy, analogous to clean energy. And it's remarkably strange how similar these things are. The petroleum economy is extractive, is exploitative, is environmentally toxic. And the dirty data economy is extractive, it's corrosive, it's socially toxic in this way. Now, unfortunately, I agree with you, Raiki, to the point that we need to get to an economy where there is this free flow of information, but there is a process to get towards that. And I don't believe that, you know, even if you look at it on a systems level, right? You know, yes, I as a human being am this, you know, walking ecosystem of cells and autonomous components that all work together in concert. But I am an autonomous being, and I can make autonomous decisions. Yes, I live in an ecosystem, which is where I'm interdependent. But I think this is what sovereignty is about, that we need to first get back to this level of sovereignty where we are actually in control of ourselves and our digital footprint, which is essentially like, you know, the meta aspect of our lives, right? You know, we talk about this meta humanity, that we have our biological self and we have our meta self now. The digital self is becoming this meta self, and it is the most important property that we have in this regard. So I think we need to start from a foundation of what is the framework that we have now for property. And that is one of our most developed legal constructs, right, around property law. And then we can then get to equitability in terms of the exchange of property between each other. You know, if I write a song and it becomes a hit and everybody wants to use it, I'm entitled to certain benefits that come from that. And I think it's the same way that in a nano context that we need to apply those same principles to our data. And we have the technology and we have the frameworks for doing that. It's just the mindset and the economic minutia that we need to develop to actually enable that.
Yeah, super interesting, Dele. And so my comment of the fundamental tension between profit and privacy is based around the existing infrastructure of this surveillance capitalism. And that's one of my biggest hopes for the future, is that, you know, shared data is more valuable than extracted data, because extracted data needs to be cleaned. It's not reliable. There needs to be all these pieces to it. If you spend 10 minutes with one properly incentivized person who's actually being open and transparent, the value of the data profile you can collect from that, as compared to the value of the data profile that Google knows about you from just, you know, following you around, you know, the shared value, the shared data is vastly more valuable than that extracted data. And that actually breaks that fundamental tension between profit and privacy. But it's the infrastructure, and you said it before, that convenience trumps privacy. So how do we put in place the infrastructure that makes it convenient to create these self-sovereign data vaults, that makes it as easy as using Google to use something that is powered by yourself and getting you to better outcomes? So I want to get back into the technology a little bit and what's out there today. I'll open this up to everybody because everybody has different views on this stuff. You know, how do we change the flow of data from where we're seeing 5% of the world and our data is just sort of exploding out into everybody else's vaults? What are the services? What are the mindsets? How do we get that paradigm moving, acknowledging the limitation of convenience will always trump?
But history's always repeated itself, right? I mean, to me, there's no real difference, right? I think now's an opportunity to, you know, to really leverage the fact that we have been abused and used data as our currency in order to get these new services, right? If you go back, we had these big telcos, right? They were government driven. They were charging huge fees to do a little phone call quickly, right? And then all of a sudden IP came along. IP disrupted the whole telco industry and made telephone calls a fraction of a cost, right? And you could do peer-to-peer calls over IP networks for free. The internet came along. Wow, that opened up the whole world to everybody. And what that did was we still had to pay, but we paid in AOL type subscriptions, right? So it was a fractional of the cost at an unlimited amount. Then all of a sudden, we had this new elements like, oh, then they became really big, right? We had Microsoft become big, Skype became big, all of these, AOL was huge, and all of these monoliths became dominant powers, right? And then all of a sudden, ooh, hang on, we can give it away for free because we'll charge the user's data and we'll charge nothing. It'll be free. Oh, yeah, I'm going to join up for that service, right? So everybody started to sign up for these services for free. And then all of a sudden they realized, oh, damn it, I'm giving away all my data and my data is my currency. And we're now in this opportunity where all of a sudden data is the currency. We all as a population are beginning to realize that. And I think the crypto world has really shown a new way to commercialize that or to build out new opportunities associated with decentralizing that data, yet providing the keys and the private keys to the individuals so they can actually access, control their data. And in fact, you're seeing business models evolve that you're getting paid for sharing your data. If you walk 100 steps, 10,000 steps a day, you get X number of sweat coins, right? If you share your Bluetooth data, you get X number of noodle coins, right? So there are a number of different companies that are beginning to reimburse you for you sharing your data on the one hand, right? And then on the other hand, there is a growing set of the population that have realized that's why Telegram has popped up, right? And I've met people in the crypto world, we don't even know these people other than by their handle names, right? I've never met the guy. I know him as emergent username, right? Or I know him as, whatever, Chico Crypto or whatever their names are, right? They don't even have a real name. They hide their pictures. They're not online. And I don't know, I remember Scott McNeely, right? I mean, he's famous for saying, if you want privacy, go and live in a jungle, right? Don't connect to the internet, right? So you don't be digital. But I think now with blockchain, all of a sudden with the private keys, we can actually start taking a bit more control. We haven't got that app yet that allows us to really make it so user-friendly that we go beyond the 100 million community that is possibly out there today. But we still have a lot of education to do. And I think with the building that we can do around that and the innovation that's taking place, how do we let these entrepreneurs and creatives really thrive and build something not limited by, oh, this is the US, we have to have SEC, Reg 5, Reg S, Reg D, et cetera, but you're allowed to actually build, and then we'll figure out how we free it up. And they did a great job around Microsoft. When Microsoft was bundling and abusing its power, Bill Gates was crying up on stage and everything, but in the end, it did help that regulation, that regulatory protection actually did help break up and created a wealth of opportunity. It created Google. It allowed a new wave of entrepreneurs to come in. It wasn't, remember going to see VCs? I don't know if any of you pitched VCs in the day when Microsoft killed Netscape, right? Out of the bat, they just killed them. They killed Real Vision with their Windows Media. And any VC you'd go and talk to would go, well, how are you going to compete against Microsoft? How are you going to compete? It's like, and all of a sudden when that regulation happened, it just opened the floodgates. And then all of a sudden innovation started to happen and drive again, which was fascinating. And how do we, software is eating the world. No. Software has eaten the world, right? It's already eating the world. It's eaten it up. And regulators are now looking at the fangs, at the bats. In China, they're going to protect the bats. The bats are going to be allowed to scale globally with the governance of the Chinese Communist Party supporting them, right? In the US, the fangs are going to use that to their benefit and use that as their defense. how are new innovations going to come up in that environment? And that's where I think, you know, we as entrepreneurs are really have a challenge in front of us. And how do we tackle that against the two superpowers that are really today, China and the US? And I mean, I hate to say it, but nobody else really matters.
Hey, Canada's very important.
Maybe India.
Nice.
Maybe India has a chance there. Right?
No, and I want to open it up because that was super interesting, Stefan. I just want to, I love because I always think about it, you know, as the barter economy right now. We're trading all of our data for, you know, a web service. And in the early days of Google, that was a fantastic deal. We traded our searches for something that was a step function better than what existed previously. I never thought about taking it those two steps previously of Microsoft before, and then the telcos before even that, of everything just has one step function better and one step function better. And I think now, you know, the value of those web services that were being provided in exchange for all of our data, it's cool, but it's not what it was in 2007 when it was revolutionary. You know, search is commodified. A lot of GPS is commodified. And so, yeah, I think you're right. It's that part of it is that next step function of something that is just so obviously better than the system, the situation that we have today. And, you know, I love getting paid for your data. I love the concept of sharing data for tokenization. And those are all sort of, you know, the limbs and the part of the baby that's sort of being built right now. But it will be that killer use case or that killer function that is just unbelievably night and day better than what exists today with our sort of centralized extractive data economy that's really going to drive that forward. Anybody want to chime in on that before we sort of move on? Michael, go ahead, please.
If I could add something maybe. I think a lot of what's being discussed is super interesting, though I think a lot of it is extremely complicated for a lot of people. You know, the idea that if you told people, hey, your data on Facebook is worth something, you know, so if I took a picture of my coffee or I took a picture of my view, you know, this is worth something. But I think going back to what Stefan mentioned earlier, I guess the only piece that makes the data valuable is the fact that advertisers are willing to advertise to the users, and that's what makes the data valuable. But if you speak to like the average person on the street and you tell them, hey, you shouldn't use Facebook because they're selling your information, or you shouldn't use this other platform because they're selling your information, like it's a completely different language. And I think a lot of what we're discussing here is great, but the problem is, you know, if the average person who hasn't built companies, hasn't been in the industry 15, 20 years, listens to this, it's like speaking Japanese or like speaking another language. And I think the key is to really communicate and make it simple. And also in building better products, like communicate it well and make it simple for people. So like someone mentioned earlier, incremental improvements or creating better products. So like Facebook beat MySpace, or Google, you know, beat Alta Vista and the many other search engines. YouTube replaced everyone having a TV in their living room, you know. So I think what needs to happen is fundamentally better products or companies which just make sense to people. And I think the key is not to discuss whether, hey, should the data be held in one place? Should it be held in many places? Because as a user, you know, most of the people really don't care. You know, I think someone mentioned that earlier. I think what we need to do is I think Ray had a really good point earlier, create a fundamental new shift in the way the economy operates. And I think one way to do it is creating many different projects to compete against what's existing, and have these new projects be structured as cooperatives. So the idea that if I had to choose between using a Facebook, which was owned by 2,000 funds and private investors and invest in fund held, or I could use a social network which I had a stake in. You know, so I think this is what's really going to revolutionize the economy. It's not going to be an incrementally improved product where people are trying to pitch and market and promote. It's going to be one which really starts from the ground up, from the community, and that's going to radically shift. And last point, I think Stefan mentioned the Telegram project. So I've been very close with the project from the beginning, and they had launched this Telegram Open Network, which I think could have had the potential to open up the floodgates and got hundreds of millions of people to understand or appreciate what it means to be an owner or a stakeholder in a business. But I guess regulators, you know, you also can't blame them, because they're just trying to protect people. And there have been a lot of scams and people who take advantage of people who have no clue about tokens or ICOs. So I think the key, just a final point, and thanks for listening, is to create a win-win scenario where you make the existing funds, the investors, the private equity firms, the government more money, make it easier for them to collect taxes, have them benefit, but in doing so, bring everyone else up. So don't try and take away power from big groups like Facebook or Google, but have them benefit, but in doing so, bring everyone else up. So it doesn't have to be zero sum. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Aparna, did you want to jump in on that?
Yes. Yeah, sorry. I had a point for what a comment made by Stefan for Microsoft and Google, to your point about VCs asking these companies, I am an entrepreneur trying to raise money in the market. And I get this question, how are you going to compete with Google and Amazon? So history repeats itself. So I don't know if there ever will be a point where, someone is going to take on these companies, and will there be a regulation that will come in that is actually going to make the level playing easier for the rest of us? So, the only difference is, there used to be one Microsoft. Now there are 5 such big companies to fight with, which is hard, incredibly harder.
And their budgets are much bigger, particularly.
And deep pockets, yes.
They're worth more than Microsoft was.
Yeah.
No, and great point, Michael and Dele. I'll come back to you in just a sec. I think you're exactly right. The average person just does not have it in their things of priorities to have the background and I say care, and I know it bugs Dele when I say people don't care about their data and privacy. But it's not sort of in the front part of their brain and daily operating system. And so I think it comes down to 2 things. One is a visceral value proposition that's different and better. So when you say like an equivalent social network to Facebook, it needs to be as good at doing the things that people like Facebook for as Facebook is. Like, people will not take a materially worse user experience. And you can see that in the privacy technologies of today. I love DuckDuckGo with all of my heart for all of the things they're trying to do, but it is a materially worse search engine than Google is. And so until we can create viscerally better value propositions of more tailored results, better communication, it's not even transparency, it's the pieces that people care about. And to your point, Michael, I think the most visceral is, hey, you get paid for doing this. So if you can actually do that, it's like, well, why would I use different Facebook? Like, well, do you get paid for using Facebook? No. Okay, great. You do for this. But we can't sacrifice on that user experience either. So you're right. You need to fit adoption and breaking this paradigm into such a narrow vibe where you can actually connect with people who aren't probably the people who are listening to this, although maybe some are. I think this could have a really interesting big audience and hopefully move a few minds, but it's got to be the grandmas of the world who just use it for one thing, or to connect with their grandkids, or that type of piece is where we need to go. And that's where I want to go next with this, but Dele, please.
Okay, so, there's so many points to pick up on. So I'm wrestling around my head, just with selecting which ones to hone in on. But I think I want to start, something Michael said that I think is really poignant, though, is that about this is hard for people to connect to and people to relate to, right? And so when we talk about, decentralization and, self-sovereignty and user-controlled AI and value at the edge, all of these terms to us make sense, but they're very abstract and are not real ways that people can connect with. So I want to make a little analogy and use that to kind of build a case. Let's talk about the concept of value of data at the edge, because again, I think there's a very big misconception around the value of data, and this idea that the only value of data is what advertisers will pay for it. This is the bullshit story that Facebook and Google have been feeding us for years, and this is what's really holding the innovation explosion, the Cambrian, the Neo-Cambrian explosion that is, we're on the cusp of from happening. We're being throttled, strangled by this advertising-led value proposition, which is so pathetic in terms of the actual real value of data. And I'll just give you, to hone that point, I'll give you a very clear example, which is something we're working on at the moment to just try and demonstrate this. The average, and it's very poignant in this kind of COVID pandemic, right? The average cost of recruiting someone to a clinical trial around the world, average cost is $20,000. $20,000, right? So, you know, and that's just basically lead generation, right? If you can generate leads of people who are relevant for a clinical trial that can actually be recruited to that trial, it's $20,000. So this anomaly of, you know, your data is worth $17.50 a year or a quarter that the FANGs try to put out there, it's just bullshit. If it was really worth that, they would allow us to buy a subscription to Facebook for $30 a year or $30 a quarter, and they'd be super profitable. But they know it's not true, because the reality is our data is worth a lot more to them than our money. That's something that is a paradigm shift we need to kind of come to terms with. Now, let's kind of talk about how what it means in terms of data at the edge. So let me give you a simple example, right? If we were to create a centralized versus a decentralized AI, right? Or centralized versus decentralized system. And we said to this centralized system, okay, I want you to go through my Flickr account with all my photos, and I want you to figure out who are my friends versus who are my associates, right? Now, if you're giving that to a centralized AI, what would it need to do to be able to make that distinction between all the photos in my Flickr account, between who are my friends versus who are my associates, right? It would have to know, but maybe, okay, you could say maybe it first goes through my LinkedIn account and looks for whether I'm connected to people professionally, or whether I go through my Facebook account and sees whether I'm connected to people socially. But do I use Facebook professionally or socially? So it will then have to mine my calendar and mine my contacts and, you know, basically make more and more deep incursions into my life to be able to figure out which pictures are my friends versus which pictures are my associates, right? And even with all of that, even if it was mining my calendar, my contacts, all of this information, it would probably still have an error rate of maybe 50%. You know, or I'd like anyone, maybe it's a bit of a challenge to put out there. I'd like anyone to be able to prove that it would be more than a 50% error or less than a 50% error rate by doing that. On the other hand, though, if I said to you, okay, I'm going to pay you 10 cents for every picture that you identify as a friend or an associate, how long would it take you to do that? You know, an hour, a couple of hours? And what would be the value of that data set that's curated between those who are your friends versus those who are your associates versus the one that is done by this extractive, you know, externalized process? Incrementally, no, significantly different, right? Now, if you were building a service on top of that, now, let's just say, for example, it was a dating service, and I want to kind of only send out messages to people who are not my associates, who are not my friends, right? Or that were connected to my friends, but not connected to my associates, for example. You know, what service would be the better service? So what I'm trying to explain is that we are going to, with a decentralized, clean data economy, the quality of the data will generate much higher quality services that will deliver far superior convenience to anything that can be delivered in the current paradigm, in the current status model. And I think that's the mindset the mind shift that I'd like us to try and get to.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Dele, that yeah, and that's back to the shared versus extracted data economy. And yeah, from a value perspective, and Enrique will get to you in one sec. From a value perspective, back to my example of the CPM, or cost per drive-by on the insurance banner when you're driving by it on a highway, versus the cost per lead when you have just set it around your Google Home. But none of that accrues back to the actual user. Like, there's so much more value in you saying, hey, I'm a lead, who come at me. But we don't even have that infrastructure today of putting yourself out there. So it's like, yeah, the data is worth $17.50 a year if it's completely aggregated and completely anonymized, and you're just putting bits into, or you're just pulling out sort of basic insights out of it. But this idea of actually connecting data-powered one-on-one connections to direct sales and create leads, like there's a ton of value that flows directly to the user out of that as well. So Reki, and then Michael, I know you just put a comment in the chat as well.
Yes, Alex, you mentioned that, whatever we're going to come up with here, it needs to be at least, you didn't say this, but I'm paraphrasing, it needs to be at least 10 times better in every single way in order for people to actually adopt it, right? But when we mentioned clean data, and what pops to my mind when I hear that is a matrix, like people like tapped into their computers, like generating this data for the big machine to like suck in the information and turn it into something, so I'm weary because what quality of life is that? I actually think it was Michael on this call told me what was happening with Google, and whenever you're identifying what the cars are in the little CAPTCHA or the sidewalks, it's Google using that to train its AI driving. So it's
100%.
I want to avoid that future where we have millions of humans, especially in poor countries where they're making 10 cents for filling in these data streams. And what are they doing? Spending 16 hours a day typing on a computer, feeding data so they can eat. That's bullshit. That's not a future that I want. So let's just, let's try to avoid that with whatever we're doing here. So what are people most concerned about today? It's money, politics. They're not concerned about their data being taken. They're concerned about, their next paycheck, or they're concerned about, X president being elected and kicking them out of a country or starting another world war. So I think we need to address that side of the equation. And Tesla was also mentioned here. And I think that's beautiful because that's so applicable. Tesla was trying to create free energy. And the current paradigm wouldn't allow it, so it was all shut down and destroyed. So whatever we're doing with data, if the economic paradigm doesn't allow it, it's going to get destroyed. It's going to get co-opted. It's going to get abused, right? So that's why I keep talking about this Renaissance idea. We're talking about a data revolution, but what is a revolution? A revolution is literally revolving. It's operating within the same paradigm, but it's just like a turn of the wheel, It's a continuance. Sometimes it's the lower class rising up and being the new top class, So I don't want data to be the new oil because oil was bullshit. So why do we want data to be the new bullshit? So it's so that's why I'm saying So I'm more interested. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, I'll just finish.
Go ahead, Dele, and then let's.
No,
I wanted.
Reki, please finish.
Yeah, so what I was just talking about is the economic renaissance. And this is where I think we can make things 10x better for people in every way. And what I mean by renaissance is instead of data being something that's, being used by some centralized party somewhere to either sell you something or give you some type of service, we could be generating this data to make more meaningful decisions of how we could evolve humanity, how we could evolve civilization. And that only works if we can rethink our economic paradigm, so that we can use it instead of it being something we're using to exploit people. Now we're using it as something we can use to improve the quality of life for all living beings on our planet. So that's the Renaissance potential we have here. And that's only possible if you go all the way to the foundation of how we're operating and we rethink it from the bottom up. Everyone loves Tesla today because they rethought the car from the bottom up, So let's use that model today and rethink the whole system. But yeah,
Michael?
That's my thing.
Yeah, and then just continuing from what Reki said, I think if you look at the internet, it's made access to information super easy. If you look at the mobile phone, it's helped with communication. I think what the blockchain and crypto can do is make access to financing or money a thing much less how it is now, where people are kind of, majority of the population is living paycheck to paycheck. If someone's trying to raise money, it's extremely tough if you don't know investors or if you don't have good connections. I think if things go well, projects like Reki succeed or what Stefan's working on or things like we're doing at Unit, then I think there'll be a huge mindset shift and we won't even have to think about monetizing data. We won't even have to think about using data to source for candidates or to advertise. So I think it's just a fundamental shift, the same way that people used to have newspapers delivered every morning. And if you told them, can you imagine a future where the newspaper delivery boy doesn't go past your house and give you a newspaper and you're paying $30 a month to get this piece of paper delivered, that would say it's ridiculous. So if you said, people aren't going to listen to a Walkman and to an iPod, they're going to be walking around with phones, the phone that was sitting in your living room, you're just going to walk around. So I think it's quite conceptually tough to think of a future where people don't really have to worry about money, or if you have an idea, there's no worry about financing it. There's no worry about putting food on the table for family or for paying your rent. But I think, you know, if things go well with what people are working on in this blockchain token, allocating resources efficiently space, I think it's going to more profoundly shift the economy than how the internet is done with communication, with information. The phone is done with communication. And then what Aparna mentioned earlier with marketplaces, this has done so much good with allocating resources and solving the communication issue. I think what it needs, the blockchain and crypto space to become mainstream, is it needs providers to start accepting these tokens or these digital assets for products or services. And it needs some successful use cases of companies which have shown, like if someone asks you, hey, what company or project has used this cooperative setup and been extremely successful, there needs to be like the Google or Facebook that has launched, so that people can say, you know, I want to be the next Google or Facebook. And at the moment, it's still a bit raw. Aparna.
Hi, so I kind of have a different position on this, right? I think overall in the world today, we have to collectively step back and think, you know, what are the type of behaviors we want to reward? And it starts all the way from investors. And, you know, open the newspaper today is like 50 articles that are talking about TikTok, and then the lineup of investors wanting to buy TikTok. I think the jury is out there really, and does the world really need another social media platform? I don't know, right? But no one, like none of these guys are stepping in front and saying, I'm going to fund the next vaccine development project that is going to save the humanity from pandemics for the next. I mean, if you look at the impact of COVID-19, it's hit the world, you know, it's cost the world $2 trillion for this year. And you know, if you're just purely looking at the economics of this, you have to sort of step back and say, you know, what is it that I want out of my money? If I'm looking for returns, you know, is it just the return on the dollar amount, or is it the overall, you know, ecosystem and what I want to benefit? Because ultimately it's going to hit to you. The exact same investor is getting hit today because of, you know, businesses are shut down and they can't make money. So these short-term gains, you know, trumping long-term impact is what I think needs to be questioned here in terms of, you know, how we want to move forward with this, right? In my mind, I think as entrepreneurs and creators, one responsibility I think we should all collectively have is just not use dollars or as the only dimension for creating our products. I think and the two things that I think, and I'm in California, I just came out of a big raging wildfire incidents on top of COVID that was going on. I would think that, you know, the world has to step up and say the other two currencies I want to add to every next creation that is coming out of either Silicon Valley or anywhere into the world is, you know, environment, impact to environment, and also public health. And, you know, those two have to be the topmost currencies for everyone in this world today.
So this is an awesome transition, and we've got sort of 14, 15 minutes left of what does the world after optimizing for money look like? And even on this call, we've done a lot, and that's sort of our existing paradigm, and everything new needs to start with where we are today. But it's a lot of, okay, well, if we pay people more and pay them for this, then they will do that type of thing. And, you know, we put money as the thing that we're all trying to optimize for, because money can buy the things theoretically that, you know, give us wellness and give us health. And those other pieces aren't calculable. So it's really hard to scale, even to your point, Aparna. How do we calculate environmental responsibility? How do we calculate public health? And that's really been the challenge with trying to sort of optimize a system-wide solution to these lower level, more emotional pieces. But now we're starting to get the technology where, you know, we have biometrics, we can have a really good idea of how healthy we are on a day-to-day basis. And on a minute-to-minute basis, we can calculate, you know, how good our sleep is. We can calculate more and more and more and more and more. So we always used money as a proxy because we couldn't calculate these other things. Now we can start to calculate those other things. So how do we just take money out of the equation, make it a fundamental fuel for a system that is actually optimizing for these other things? And you know, it's an esoteric question, and I think, you know, most conversations end exactly where we are today. of, okay, great. Yeah, we need a new system. We need a new paradigm. So, money shouldn't be as important. We need to start thinking about these other things. Let's try and spend the last 10, 15 minutes. What can we calculate? How can we actually build and optimize an AI, a personalized AI first, because it's easier to think about ourselves. And then how can we scale that system globally? I have a bunch of ideas, would love to hear thoughts from anybody else about calculable things that aren't money.
I mean, Alex, we've already started on the journey. So this is not, I mean, we're on the journey now. So we start to realize, look at what's happened with SpaceX and Blue Origin. We're starting to go beyond. We understand we've got a finite amount of time that we're going to be on this planet and be able to use the resources here. We need to explore. So I believe it's already started. And I believe the democratization of opportunity is in full swing. It's not easy. And it's hard, as you said, you've got these institutions in place that are holding us back, but we're forced to go forward today. And we have hope. We're having panels just like this to talk about it. They didn't happen years ago, right? It's happening today. So I believe we are on that journey. And it's not easy because people are resistant to change. They don't want to change. They like the comfort of those institutions, and going into this new world, this new virtual world, understanding we have, as you said about being able to monitor environment, being able to monitor our own health. It's critically important. But then what do we do with the data? Right? How do we forecast where we're going to be? How do we get the technology to be able to help make us better? We worked on a project at Stanford called Health Extensions with a group of MBAs called Living to 120. It was eye-opening. The technologies are going to be in place to do that. But the swing is there. Now, we have to be some more supportive of it, sure. And we've got to democratize it, and people have to share. We've got to be able to spread it out. The internet created one level of that in terms of democratizing the opportunity. Electricity itself in the early 1900s was the first level of it from my perspective. But now we're in this new level, this new virtual world that has just dramatically, exponentially increased the opportunity. So each one of us are charged with moving it forward. And I believe each one of us here are already in the process of making that happen.
Totally agree. One concept that I love the idea of is sort of a capitalless VC fund, where you take money out of it entirely and entirely use resources, connections, time, effort, travel, physical things, completely non-financial resources, and pick something that's not money, like the well-being. Life expectancy is a great example. Something that's tangible, that's not money, and calculate an IRR that literally has nothing to do with money. Like, let's try an experiment that takes money out of the traditional financial capital entirely. And that's, I think, what we're all trying to do in various different points of our system, whether it's within Seeds, whether it's within Unit, whether it's within Dele, MetaMe as well, of creating this world where value isn't tied to fiat, it's tied to value. But I think we don't have, if we don't have the language to talk about privacy, we certainly don't have the language to talk about this non-monetary value side. Please, yep.
Yeah, I think so. There is a transition, right? I think they say that maths is the language of the universe, right? Mathematics is the language of the universe. The universe speaks to us in mathematics. I would say that data is the currency of the universe, and it is a universal currency. And I take Reki's point earlier that data, I agree with you. I hate the analogy data is the new oil or data is the new air. It's more than all of that. Data is a resource, the likes of which we have never encountered before. But effectively, life is an information phenomena. It's an informational phenomena. That's what the being alive is. It's processing information and responding to information, and consuming information and generating information. So I would argue that data is the currency of the universe. But to put that in a more down-to-earth, everyday, pragmatic sense, I don't think people care about their money per se, because what is money? Nobody knows what money really is anyway. People don't care about pieces of paper in their wallet or bits of metal historically, or numbers that sit on a screen. They care about what the money can do for them. They care about what it can impact that it can have on their lives. And of course, it's become warped that we've become obsessed with accumulating these numbers of it, because we know that we can have so much more power and influence in society as a result of accumulating it. But I think it is the same thing with data. And so what we really need is a transition from money, which is a kind of dumb, abstract, completely vacuous construct for value, to data, which is actually a much richer construct for value. And what it's missing is a mechanic for being able to attribute and assign that value. It's like the fungible, non-fungible conundrum, right? The value of money is that it's fungible, so it's very transferable. But so we need a non-fungible way to quantify the value of, a fungible way to quantify the value of the non-fungible data assets, effectively, in more tech speak. I think that's what's
awesome. This has been super interesting. I want to go do a quick roundtable, final thoughts, wrap up of a minute or so. And then I want to propose a next step for all of us. So maybe let's start with Stefan, just 60-second thoughts of what you want to leave the audience with.
Yeah, I think embrace the change, right? I mean, history, again, I go back to history because I do think history always repeats itself. We all started off, the world was flat. Nobody wanted to accept the fact that it was round. And once we realized that it was round, we could travel beyond those borders and go and explore new countries, accept new types of food, new biodiversity, new cultures. And that enriched those societies that did that first and brought that information back. We've explored the whole planet. We are still sort of in this old world where we believe that these lines on a piece of paper dictate the boundaries of what we can do. And I don't think that in the next decade, this decade now, is going to be changed. Look, we're all in different parts of the world. We're all born and raised in different parts of the world where we live today. Why can we not do that overall on a global scale? And then how do we manage our ways through that? I believe blockchain is going to be that new governing institution that is going to allow us to control and be a part of a community to which we want to be involved in. And there will be bridges between the different blockchains where the governance reside. And our wallet, as we know it today, will be our lifetime achievement portfolio, right? Where we have our non-fungible tokens, we have our fungible tokens, our collectibles that are more important than the resume. It tells us more about us, about where we went to school, what our passions are, who our friends are, what our projects are that we are engaged in. That is going to be resembled in some form of token, badge, or something. And I think we're in this decade of big change that is going to drive the next century.
Fantastic. Aparna?
Yeah, I mean, I think adding to Stefan's point, I'm very optimistic about what the future is going to look like. I think data is a very powerful currency. The governance, or sort of like the systems that exist in our society today, have to evolve to a point where, there is objective and I would say responsible use of data, which has to be the driving factor. And in the end, I think we have to kind of selectively and collectively decide what problems do we want to solve for this world. I think that is at the crux of everything. Is it, to your point, is feeding bullshit, ad bullshit to that Facebook and Google are doing today? Is that what we want to do? More of what we want to do? Or do we want to raise our hands and says, okay, this is enough. Let's divert our attention. The world's different problems have to be solved. Let's move in that direction.
Awesome. Michael?
Yeah, I think it's super exciting. Like, I think if everyone takes the approach that anything really is possible, and there's so much in this world that's made up, like what Stefan said about boundaries and lines, or the idea of the financial system being something that's completely man-made, and is able to distinguish what's in thought and what's in reality, I think then it really opens up opens up the room for possibility in terms of how the future society might look like. So I think Stefan had a really interesting idea there earlier, the idea that, you know, if you walk down the street and you speak to like the everyday person, like what would be in their portfolio? Are they going to be investing and supporting a bunch of artist friends, or people who wanted to start a gym, or someone who's wanted to build a playground or start a school? So this idea that value how it is now, or like what Della mentioned earlier about data, the concept of it radically changing, I find that super exciting. And I think, like, in terms of the shift that has happened in the past 6 months, where people are now open to the idea of attending a Zoom meeting or a Zoom webinar, where I remember a year ago trying to ask people, hey, would you mind speaking on a panel on Zoom? And they're like, are you joking? Like, who's going to listen to it? Or like, what's the point of talking to a computer for now? And now everything's open, and companies are also a bit more hungry for business. Like a year ago, they might have been completely reluctant to try something new, but now, you know, there is a possibility of doing something new. So yeah, I'm overall very excited. And yeah, great.
Awesome. Gary?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, it's interesting because here we are in this virtual world. It really has given us the time to escape and grow. And look at the fundamentals. You know, it's back to the future. Bike sales are up. People are spending more time with their families. They've been forced to do it. The Himalaya mountains, the first time in 30 years, they've been able to be seen. It's changed. We've had to go back to the future. I believe we've really set a precedent to go forward. I'm hopeful for humanity. We're resilient. I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to adapt. And data is critically important. Absolutely. And I believe people are starting to realize that, and the changes are already starting to take place. And it's just like this panel here that's going to help bring that forward. So I'm really hopeful and very positive about the future.
Awesome. Dele?
Yeah, I mean, God, I just to build on what everyone else has said, firstly, real pleasure to be on this panel with everyone. It's been such a wonderful conversation. I think just again, leading from what everyone has said, reality is a consensus view. And I don't think there has been any point, certainly in recent history, where the foundations of reality have been more in flux. You know, this is an incredible time. This moment right now, you know, not 5 years time or 10 years time, right now, we have a species level event. We have a species level experience that we are all going through. We are all going through this transition and transformation together. And I think that now is the time for us to demand this new future. You know, it's kind of like our last exit before calamity, right? You know, and this is the last chance for us as a species to come together and really build a world that we can all imagine. You know, we always say that humanity is as evil as we can imagine. Well, that also means that we can be as phenomenal, as miraculous, as breathtaking, as wonderful as we can imagine as well. And this is the crossroad that I think we're at now. So I'm very optimistic about the future. I'm very hopeful for the future, but we have to take the action now. We have to bring that future into being right now. And so my last sort of thoughts to people is to go out there and do your piece in bringing the world that we want into reality today.
Awesome. Reiki, bring us home.
Y'all are epic. Happy to have been on here. I think predicting where humanity is going is about as useful as a baby predicting life outside the womb, or a caterpillar predicting life as a butterfly. However, I'm going to try. What's happening now is a Cambrian explosion and experiments of new types of civilization. So I predict a very near future where all humans are going to be able to have the fundamental freedom to choose what type of civilization they want to be a part of. And that means the economic, financial, governance, data sharing systems that they want to participate in and that they want to be a part of. Because if we don't have that fundamental freedom, then all of our freedoms are a mirage. Our choice is about as meaningful as choosing between Coke and Sprite. You know, they both are toxic and they both taste bad, so that's not a choice. So I don't think there's going to be one new type of civilization that we're moving into. I think there's going to be an abundance of them, and at least one of them is going to be regenerative by design. But that extreme diversity of new models of attempting how to organize humanity is what really, really excites me. And that's it.
Amazing. And I obviously echo all of you. I thank all of you. This has been an incredible panel. I think this idea of, let's get us all onto the same playing field where we can use our technology to really take this as a jump towards whatever's next. We've spent so long evolving ourselves to this point, and we've created this incredibly complex, diverse, technologically advanced society and globe that's unbelievably interwoven with each other, and this system that you can't see the edge of. And it's really, really, really challenging to move forward, but it's exactly stuff like this that is going to be different models, different ways to use the pieces that we've built today, different ways to use all of the incredible power and thoughtfulness and intelligence capacity and horsepower that's on calls like this and on calls that are happening all over the world. And Michael, to echo your point, the unit ventures stuff that you've been doing has been unbelievable. It's just getting everybody's individual takes on things and going all around the world over and over and over again. And we'd never be able to do it if we didn't have this global calamity and this global pandemic. So, everything happens for a reason. Everything is some catalyst towards something new. And I think it's calls like this. And I actually want to propose to move this a little bit forward even. The idea of this venture uncapital fund where no dollars, some other form of return, some project where we can have a tangible defined good. I'm going to take the first stab at it. I would love all of your help to sort of keep this going as a bit of an intellectual experiment, but something that can potentially grow as one of these million different ways that we can try and reorganize ourselves in a world after money or in a world where fiat doesn't dominate. So I'm going to propose that we take as a next step for this group to keep this whole conversation moving forward, because this has been incredible. I started off by saying I want this to be a hopeful conversation. I'm closing it by saying I have a lot more hope after having this conversation. So thank you very much, guys. Thanks, Basil, for organizing. Thanks, everybody, for joining. This has been incredible, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you all.
Cheers, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Pleasure, everyone.